Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask Right and Good. I'm so excited that you're here today. My name is Rebecca Gramella, and I am the founder of Right and Good. And you have found yourself at the live bi-monthly speaker series where we're talking with incredible women, a few men, hopefully, as well in the future, about just things that are going on in the world of social impact, communications, all things ethical businesses and equitable businesses. I'm fortunate to work with an amazing community as an entrepreneur of people who are kind of doing their own thing, and excited to bring you Amy today. So I will give you a little introduction and let you know the agenda here, and I will let her take it away. So again, these are meant to be short, impactful conversations. We anticipate this being about 20 minutes. So if you're watching live, feel free to interact and pop in questions that we're happy to answer. If you're watching this after the fact, you can always tag us and ask questions. We're always happy to do that. Amy Steinmann is the founder of Halbrooke and Elm Strategic Communications. She has decades of experience, or excuse me, not decades, more than a decade of experience in healthcare, government, and nonprofit communications. And she's passionate about developing strategies for her clients to help them overcome their communication challenges. So I won't get into her official bio because she's going to say so much about her work today. That's going to be great. So yeah, I'll let her introduce herself and take it away. Today we're discussing all things the Great Resignation. So definitely a hot topic going on in our world right now.
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction, Rebecca. As Rebecca said, I'm Amy Steinmann. I'm principal at Halbrooke and Elm Strategic Communications, where I provide communication, social media, and content marketing strategy to healthcare, government, and nonprofit organizations. And yeah, talking about the Great Resignation, I'd like to think that I was one of the early adopters of this trend. I resigned from my full-time role in October of 2020, and I'll get into a little bit more about that a little bit later. But 4.5 million people left their jobs in November, which is equivalent to the 65 and over population in Florida, which is a huge number of people. And people are leaving jobs for all sorts of reasons. Not only, people who are in the service industry, but all the way up to executives and CEOs.
Wow.
Yeah, and I found some information from this executive outplacement firm called Challenger Gray and Christmas. They track CEO departures. In October, there were 142 departures, which was the second highest month on record. And in the final quarter of 2021, the number of departing CEOs was up 16% year over year. So people are leaving.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you were for some reason less familiar with this conversation, Amy and I just really naturally reached this topic because I think when we first started working together, we bonded over the fact that we both, through different routes, had found ourselves working for ourselves, leaving our full-time jobs to do so. And now at this point, I should say when I started doing that, I was also a little ahead of the curve, but was a little nervous about it, kind of trepidatious with what it looked like to work for myself. And now that when I hear someone contemplating leaving their job, I'm excited. I'm like their cheerleader, like, yeah, quit your job, get out of there, do your own thing. It's interesting to see, like you said, the numbers really just speak for themselves as well. And so if you're not familiar with this topic, as Amy was sharing, in the last year or so, just huge swaths of people are leaving their full-time employment. I think a lot of times when we hear about it on the news, it tends to be coming from like an HR or an operations professional discussing, data at large and how, we're having difficulty filling part-time roles at restaurants or gig economy workers. But as you pointed out, it's CEO from the top down, people just reflecting on, their values and how they're spending their work time during the week.
Yeah, and this pandemic definitely hasn't helped anything. I mean, between quarantines and lack of childcare or lack of reliable childcare, it's really put stress on people to figure out how they can balance, managing their workload and managing their family life. And interesting, I found a survey that was conducted by MetLife in September that found 42% of managers in the 26 to 40 age bracket reported experiencing burnout, which was the highest among the age cohorts that they surveyed. And that's definitely a reason that I considered, or I decided to leave my job. I was feeling just really burnt out and overwhelmed. especially because of the pandemic. It just was a factor that really affected me.
Yeah. We can get into some of the details of that in a minute because I know everyone kind of has a different reason for doing so. I coincidentally, I was telling Amy just before we started recording, I listened to a fun podcast last week also about this topic by the Breadwinners. A shout out if you want to check that out. But they were discussing how much of an identity shift has happened for the individuals that are out there working right now. And, that also that people who had planned on quitting with COVID or kind of being forced to come back. And they're just basically all this discontent has created this environment where people are leaving their jobs. A fun fact, the term the Great Resignation is coined by, I wrote down his name, Anthony Klotz from the School of Management at my alma mater, Texas A&M. But people are calling it all kinds of things. They're calling it the big quit. They're saying, we're going to be our own business leaders. There's a lot of like startup and entrepreneur culture here, but it sounds like that isn't really what motivated you to shift into the role that you're in now. So do you feel comfortable sharing some of the life circumstances that led you to where you are now?
Yeah. So it's funny because always in the back of my mind, there was this idea that maybe I would start my own business, but it was something that was just so far removed from my reality that I just never thought that it'd be something that I don't know. I don't even know when I thought I would do it, but it just seemed like something long in the future. But I gave birth to my daughter at the end of the summer in 2019. I had a great 12-week maternity leave, but I was really ready to go back to work. I was excited about going back to work. And the company that I worked for is a federal contractor. And for the better part of 10 years, I had worked on a contract that while I was out on leave ended. And I knew that it was going to be ending. And my supervisor, who was a mentor and almost like a second mom to me, she retired. So, going back to work after having a baby is a big change as it is. But then going back to work to a job that's a little bit different, you're still with your same team members, but there's a shift. There's something that's different. And so about a couple of months after coming back to work, I had an opportunity for a promotion. I'd be overseeing the communications department and supervising staff. And so I interviewed for the role and was offered it. And then I accepted it. And about a month later, the pandemic hit. And so what was so challenging about that is, not only was I trying to manage being a full-time working mom, navigating this new role, and then all of my usual outlets for dealing with, stress and anxiety and all those kinds of things, like chatting with my coworkers and going to social gatherings and taking fitness classes at the gym, all of that was suddenly cut off. Yeah. And so I fell into a depression and, it was just a really difficult time. And I started talking with a therapist to help me put, my options in a perspective. And so in October of 2020, I made the very difficult decision to resign from my position. And I have to say, I do realize my privilege in being able to make that decision because I have the support of my husband and my family. But I realize that there are people who, are desperately wanting to quit their jobs and don't have that support. So I realized that was something that I was able to do. One thing that's interesting, I'm very type A, always have a plan kind of girl. I had no plan. I resigned. I had applied to a couple of positions that I, obviously wasn't offered. And so about a month after I, had kind of come down from the high of submitting that resignation, I had this nagging feeling, not nagging, but just this intuition that maybe I should be working for myself. And I remember my mom telling me one morning, like, Amy, if you're feeling this, you really need to pursue that. And so I started doing some research. And that'd be my first tip. If anyone who's listening right now or watching right now is thinking about making the jump and possibly starting their own business, do your research. I reached out to a grad school colleague who had started her own business about 18 months prior, another colleague who had been laid off from her job and had started her own business, to really learn, from them what had worked well, what hadn't, what they wish they would have known when they were starting a business. And really just tried to soak in as much as I could before I really decided to make that decision. And then I think, another tip is build your plane before you fly it. I did so much research on business structures, LLC versus S Corp, and how to, bill for projects or to do, retainer clients. coming up with my messaging, figuring out my target audience, building my website. I had all of that in place before I officially launched. And actually, next week, February 2nd, is my 1 year anniversary, which I'm really excited about.
Yay. Yeah, that's the biggest anniversary, right?
Huge milestone. Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember we originally connected because I started maybe a little before you, but we were both still pivoting and figuring out exactly like you said, like, what does it look like to do some of our offering? What is that? What's worked best? What hasn't for you? Thank you. Yeah, for sharing that. That's really interesting. And I also really appreciate you centering, the privilege component of this discussion as well, because I think for the two of us on this call, presenting, there was a little bit of that opportunity there to be able to say, let's just do it and see if we can make this work. If not, we'll do something else. But for others, the risk is much higher to leave your job, and still, as you shared at the very beginning, people are doing it. So there's clearly a stronger motivation than money. I do think it's interesting to think about the fact that COVID unsettled so many people that the risk was greater than the reward. At a certain point, people are willing to make that change to see what they can navigate, because the bottom fell out for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
Well, congrats on the 1 year mark. And I also love, you sharing your story about parenthood and how that plays into things. I myself am not a parent, but when I work with my peers right now, all I have is empathy for what it looks like to do that double shift all day long, every single day. It's a lot. It's a lot
Yeah.
rolled into the difficulty that's already there with starting a business, right?
Right. And one of the things that has been really great about having my own business now is having that flexibility. And, you and I have talked offline about the fact that, my daughter's had to quarantine twice this month for a total of 20 days. She has gone to daycare a total of 7 days this entire month.
That,
And, thankfully, yeah, and thankfully, because I own my own business and I have the flexibility, I'm able to be home with her and give her my attention. Whereas if I was working in a full-time, role, I would be home, but I'd have to take leave or unpaid leave, or
Mhm.
be working after she went to bed, and I still have to do that to a point. Being a business owner, but I just have a lot more flexibility than I would.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that is important to share, because what you shared is that flexibility is, I think, one of the largest draws for people who are looking to leave their role. And also, that doesn't mean it's necessarily glamorous, right?
right.
Flexibility means you're still dealing with life, and that has its ups and downs in its own way. And I think also, making it work is really the important situation. I also heard earlier in your comment, I loved that when you decided to resign, you were still applying to other roles. You weren't 100% sure that you were still going to work for yourself. And I felt that so deeply as someone who, kicking and screaming, became an accidental entrepreneur and tried every avenue before working for myself, because I'm going to give us credit as marketers. We're the big project managers on the team. And we're saying,
Yep.
I don't feel confident saying I'm doing this until I have a plan in place. And I think a huge component of the Great Resignation is that a lot of people are sitting in their office making that plan and feeling confident to take that leap if they're able to.
Yeah. I'll say one of the things that was so hard too, even when I was applying for jobs, was I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I mean, I just sort of felt, my identity sort of shifted a bit. And we talked about this, becoming a new mom and kind of living in this new COVID world. I really just wasn't sure where I wanted to be. And it wasn't until after I was able to resign and have some time to really think that the idea of working for myself and being a business owner really started to take shape for me. And it took that downtime and that quiet time to really reflect and think about what I wanted out of a job and out of a career, for that for me to be able to make that decision.
Sure. What do you feel some of the biggest shifts were, both personally and professionally, as you moved from working for someone to eventually working for yourself?
One of the things that I'm still working on that I kind of wasn't expecting was my confidence. I made the decision to go into my own business. I knew I could do it. But I think there are some times where it just feels like, that imposter syndrome gets you, right? You see all these great things other people are doing and you think, well, I should be doing that. I don't know, I'm not doing that. I don't know what to do. You have proposals that you spend time doing and then they don't go anywhere or you don't get accepted. But the more you work at it and the more work you win, and even the work that you don't win is a learning opportunity. And so, like I said, my confidence, I'm still working on it, but it's grown a lot. And I really feel a lot stronger than I did when I first started.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I don't necessarily want to perpetuate the work hustle mentality or self starter mentality, but I think if you are working for someone currently and you find yourself being the proactive person on the team, like those are the same skills that you use in working for yourself, because you're creating your workload, and you have to combat that imposter syndrome that starts creeping in with, oh, I am my brand, no matter what type of self-employed person I am, instead of relying on the brand of someone that you worked for prior, right?
Right.
Very interesting dynamic.
One of the things that I always found that I did when I, had a full-time job is I always loved to take the lead on projects. And so I think that then, being in business for myself, you are the lead, you have to take the initiative to do things, manage your workload. And so that's, something that some people struggle with. For me, I love being organized. I use a project management tool. I have, my lists. And so it's been nice to be the one that's calling the shots and driving, flying the plane, so to speak, to use that metaphor again. So yeah.
Yeah. I also think it takes a little bit of time to kind of unwind from the habits that you had in that full-time role. Like you said, you already proactively did all those things, but when you're doing it for yourself, for me at least, it took a little bit of time to say, oh, I am working for myself. So if I do need to take a half day for an appointment or for a really important errand or something, like that is something I've built into my day versus feeling that I owe someone that time. And again, that just speaks to that just human element that seems to be driving the Great Resignation at large. The fact that employers create, or many employers at least, create such a dynamic that it's a constant you owe me mentality of working for someone, where now you get to rebuild that confidence amongst yourself, which is really nice.
Yeah, I think, something that I feel like happened during the pandemic is this reevaluation of our boundaries as well. With so many of us working from home and having to deal with childcare, and even not, but just being at home all the time and working. I think that's one of the things that I've tried really hard to do is set really firm boundaries as a business owner. So I am only responding to emails during my business hours. At 7 o'clock, if I get an email, I'll respond to it the next morning. I think that's a harder boundary to set when you work for someone else. It's possible, but it's harder. And so that's one of the things that I've really tried to do now as a business owner, is to make sure that I set those boundaries and stick with them, which has improved my, satisfaction in working too.
You're completely right. And those boundaries are for you as much as they are for your interactions with other people. And the more you uphold them, the more you shape, your time and freedom as well. I'm reminded of the uptick of, or maybe creation of, I don't know, of the anti-work subreddit. Not that we need to get in space right now, but just thinking about some of the most controversial posts that people share. In case you're unaware, this thread basically shares really horrific work stories that people have experienced. And almost all of them are around those boundaries that you talked about: communication, illness, death, just human behavior that is unavoidable and that management has, in these examples at least, been completely, unresponsive to or reasonable about. And I find it getting referenced a lot more in articles that I read, because there's so many just classic examples in there that speak to what you've just spoken about as well.
I like to joke with my friends, or if I've got someone that wants to meet me for lunch or have a meeting, do you think you'll be able to join us? And I'll say, I don't know, I got to check with my boss. She's been really just because it's a funny thing.
So true also. Well, In the interest of, these being digestible conversations, I think the main question I wanted to end on was, okay, we've gone through the Great Resignation. We've been a part of this statistic that exists out there. Do you ever think that you would go back to working for someone else, or how do you feel about that topic right now?
For the foreseeable future, I do not see
Yeah.
myself going back. So I'll never say never, because you do never know what's going to happen. But for right now, like I said, for the foreseeable future, I want to, as long as the work is flowing and people are interested in working with me, then I definitely want to continue working for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's kind of the new pending question right now is everyone realizing what structures that they feel comfortable with. And I agree. I feel the same way about the Great Resignation, which is why I was so excited to talk to you about it. But it's also okay to be okay if that's not your vibe and that doesn't work out for you as well. So
Yeah, absolutely.
well, thank you so much for joining me today, Amy.
Well,
For
thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
Yeah. For everyone who tuned in, you can find Amy linked in the information below, both on my website and on LinkedIn. Please connect with her. And as far as Ask Right and Good, our goal is to do this twice a month. So we do have someone scheduled 2 weeks from now, and we're excited to bring you this conversation. If there are any topics that you want us to cover, just let us know, and we will do that in the future. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca.
Bye.